This is perhaps the most iconic view of the Sydney Opera House, one of my local landmarks. But it's not necessarily an easy one to draw. While it's a relatively simple form, simplicity gives us nowhere to go if we don't get things right, particularly proportions. And because these are curves and they create really quite unfamiliar triangular curved shapes, they're not as straightforward even for proportions as rectangles. So they are a bit of an effort and they do take a lot of observation. We need to really observe the curves and the shapes that are created inside each shell before we commit the ink on the paper. And I would suggest that perhaps a little more time on observation than you possibly think you might need, because I've seen many very out of proportion drawings of the Sydney Opera House where the shelves really don't curve the way they do in life. So lots of observation, but it's not just each individual shell, it's where they sit in relation to each other for, say, height, and also for how far out they come horizontally as well. Because it's not just the shape of each shell, it's the overall proportions of the building when we put them all together. And then we've also got the platform that the Opera House sits on, which again is a little bit complicating. And if we look carefully before we start to draw, we realise that, in fact, the shells don't all sit on the same level. That at the left-hand side, they go up 2 levels, and the right-hand side, they come down a level. So we have to make sure that we don't just draw one long straight line for the bottom of the platform before we start to draw the shells, because we actually won't want that once we start drawing the shells. So again, careful observation rather than what we think we've seen. Oh, it's on a long straight line. Well, actually it's not. And I'm trying to now look at where this comes, and like to position that line, I look at the triangular shape I create with the shell I've already drawn in my reference first and then on my photo. So again, that's using negative space. It's using the space around or between our objects as an actual shape to use, whether compositionally or from a more technique point of view, to help position the lines properly. I had a little bit of trouble here where it steps up. I hadn't quite put marks in the most helpful place, so trying to reposition that, but I'm pretty confident this area is not going to be the major viewing point anyway. So a little bit of careful observation on the reference, because it is white on white and cream on white, and it can be hard to see all the lines that are actually helpful to see, that are still there on the photo. So now I'm coming across with this final shell, and it, combined with the triangular wedge that it leans up against on the right hand side, it comes out a bit further than the one that I've already drawn. But as we work more at keeping things in proportion, it does become a bit easier as we go on. And you can see that I pull that back a little bit from my first thought where I put the dot. I use lots of dots as positioning marks to let me mark on the paper where I think it's going to be, but then to step back and to try and visualize it drawn now to that point and referencing the photo and thinking, is that looking right? Is that going to create the shapes and the negative shapes that I need? And if I'm not confident, then I may well move the mark and do that process again for the new mark. And there was a little bit of trick here because I had to leave space on the shell to allow the left-hand shell of the restaurant, which is closer to us than the rest of the building. So therefore it comes in front of the other shell. And again, I had a little bit of trouble with the platform, the podium that the Opera House sits on. And look, if you're finding this helpful, then please hit the like button right now for me. And if you're finding these 10-minute daily drawing exercises in real time helpful, then please let me know in the comments so I keep doing them as long as there's interest in them. And I certainly hope you give this one a go. Of course, you'll find the reference photo on my channel community page. Just trying to work out exactly what I haven't done right here at the podium level. And now I've got that final shell. Now, as I was trying not to do, because I thought it would be a problem, I was trying not to draw the restaurant, the two smaller shells on the right-hand side, too large. But I have gone, I think, a bit large with them. And now we have the platform that the Opera House sits on. Just trying to sort it out. It's relatively simple again, but there are some openings in the side. The shells contain the opera hall and the concert hall, but underneath under the platform we have some drama theatres and some other performing arts spaces. So these black squares are in fact entrances and lighting into the foyer areas of some of those under the podium spaces. And then we have this enormous staircase that leads up to the Opera House, which is partly off camera. Just doing some marks for the wall, if you like, of the restaurant. These lovely glass curtain walls in a, from memory, sort of yellowy bronze colour. The Opera House is a child of the 70s in some ways. And the same for the front shell into the harbour. And there's a great area there just to walk along the width of that shell in that glassed-in section, enjoying the harbour views, looking straight up at the harbour bridge on one side and Circular Quay, where there's these days, more often than not, an enormous cruise ship sitting there, as well as the ferries going about their daily business back and forth on the harbour. So now I'm just trying to work out what's happening. So here's now the space under the main staircase. So while the grand staircase out in the sunshine is lovely to walk up, there is access underneath that includes lifts and escalators. More straightforward ways of getting up the height. And now the last details on the front here. I'm looking at the time and it's getting very close. It was, I think, about 9.5 minutes at this point from memory. So I've just really got to do the line for the water, for the harbour. That rules the underlining of this building. And then I wanted to just do a little hint of the trees that we see on each side. On the right-hand side, those trees are on the other side of the next cove, of which this is the small headland. But on the left-hand side, those trees that we see there are actually on the other side of the harbour. They're on the north side of the harbour. Just doing these lines, not for the colour, although I could have done them simply to reflect the fact that there is local colour there, but they're actual vertical lines in the concrete. And here's the couple of lines to indicate the trees on the north side of the harbour. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. I hope you found this interesting, this helpful. I hope you give it a go, this grand building from my hometown. Not necessarily straightforward, but you'll find the photo on my channel community page. But whatever you draw, however it turns out, whether it's a daily exercise or a 10-hour grand adventure, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.